Dumelang and greetings to everyone. And I give thanks for the school for allowing us to come and share and learn together about the important topic that has to do with Black aesthetics and how they then relate with spirituality. In fact, in what I know, those two things are not separate. They're always sort of conjoined together, and they are one and the same thing. So I'm not sure if Bali, I'm supposed to try and share the presentation that I've made, or you would be able to share it on my behalf.
Please try and share the presentation. I've given you sharing rights from my end.
Okay, great. Okay, let me try and open it here real quick. Okay, so yeah, so I'm just going to try and go through several things, or several themes that have to do with the Black arts movement, as we see them. I mean, centered in South Africa, and looking at some of the artists that were connected to what was the Black consciousness arts movement or cultural movement in Tswane. And these are the likes of Ntate Lefif Tladi, Motlhabane Mashiangwako, Fikile Makadlela, and guys like Hiri Moyaga. So I'm just gonna show a few of their works and a few of their pieces, and yeah, and address some of the issues then that come up when we look at these works. And then also then I think perhaps one of the things that we have to do as kind of like a starting point has to do with the idea of how, like, in terms of definitions, I think okay, let me just get this presentation thing right, because it is throwing me off just a little bit. Wait. Okay, there we go.
Are you winning?
Yeah. No, I'm getting it correct. Just give me a second. No, let me just find a way to share it. Share. Okay, I can't find the particular window. Okay, let's share this one instead. And start from there. Okay. There we go. So I'm not sure if, are you able to see the document that I'm sharing?
Yes, we're able to see the document. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, so I think we can start here with I think what I used as a cover piece is a work by Ubabufile Makatlela, which is called Melodious Journey Through the Cosmos.
I'm sorry, are you able to put your presentation on presentation mode?
Let's see. There we go.
Great. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, so I think just to start, what we've always sort of seen and experienced in the definitions that have been attributed to art, particularly in South Africa, is that it has generally been Black art has generally been defined as township art, um, which I think is a point that we have to start from in terms of refuting these kind of definitions and breaking them down. I think as part of um, this process of decolonizing concepts and ideas of what the creative arts as practiced by Africans and by Black people were all about. A lot of the times in township art, what we see is just sort of like a reflection of just uh, the Black living conditions, um, without so much of the engagement with the imagination, and therefore with the communal consciousness that is needed for us in the way that we see it to move towards kind of like building liberating concepts and liberating mindsets. And of course, this sort of locks us into sometimes glorifications of things like poverty. You know, you see a lot of these ideas of shacks and things like that, but always done very colorfully and very vibrantly so that it looks and feels very attractive. Even though what it is depicting is actually squalor, and impoverishment. Where in fact, when we go back to an image like this one of Ubabufigile Makadlela, we are then transported to other realms of thinking, where we deal with spiritual aspects, we deal with, you know, there are these kind of like ethereal themes and hands in the shadow that seem to be, um, you know, the powers behind what it is that we begin to see. Um, so in what we have learned from um, this particular group of people that I'm speaking about, the artists who were mentored by Ntate Jeff Mpakati, who is from Mamelodi, who was actually a mentor of many of the artists that came out around the period of Black consciousness during the apartheid era, or the birth thereof, because I think this is a continuing period that we still are living under and are still grappling with defining. It hasn't necessarily ended with the 94 era of the coming of the so-called new constitutional and democratic South Africa. Um, some of these aesthetics continue to be brought through through various other artists and agents. I think Umbali mentioned someone like Orapeleng Simanga, who is a great proponent of these kinds of works because he learned from Ntate Lefif, who learned from this collective. Um, and so did myself and a group of other young people as well, who are still carrying this kind of artwork on. So these group of artists were extremely opposed to the idea of township art, because township art, or the concept of township art, sort of located you within a different kind of thinking and a different kind of praxis, and locked you in within the space of the township in a way that your work never pretty much made it out of of those confines. But we see in the works of people like Ubabufigile Makadlela and Heri Moyaga, who I will explore next, is that we see this kind of work. And then I've included this quote by Ukoko Toni Morrison because I think it's important to think about how presenting ideas is not necessarily about, as she says, about that particular solution, but it is about being fearless as one can be and behaving as beautifully. And I would like to emphasize this idea of of behaving as beautifully as one can under completely impossible circumstances. Um, and the idea of impossibility then also sort of reminds me of a close friend and comrade of mine who deals with this idea of the performative and artistic expression when faced against the impossibility of being, which is Dumi Mokhorosi. If you ever have read the De-Aesthetic, or it is a book that if you haven't read, I would recommend that you look into it, because it also delves into how then we see this in the musical sphere that came up and rose from this Black consciousness era that influenced the likes of Ubabu Zimwawana and Hebitswaedi and the many other jazz artists that we experience today. So when we are exploring these themes of the visual arts, we see, as I said, that the idea of spirituality and the arts are not necessarily disconnected. Ritual is always part of Black life, and how we then facilitate ritual often comes out in very artistic ways, um, and this actually then leads us to think about this idea of how theology often tends to segment us into different parts of community. You know, it disunifies us. Where in townships we find that one family is classified as Catholic, the others are Methodist, and others are Dutch Reformed, and so on. And of course, this theology needs is an idea that I think deserves proper sort of research and study for us in order to sort of dismantle some of the themes that were implanted in there that seem to permeate even into current communities today. But I think then what I wish to focus on when it comes to Black aesthetics and the visual arts and how they connect to spirituality is that these become part of what are myth-making modes of understanding life, because this is how we sort of grapple with the idea of finding meaning in doing what it is we're doing, and therefore this way of finding meaning has also then found its way into how we resist the colonial and capitalist forms of oppression that the arts seem or that capitalists seem to want to impose on us, and the arts then become a very vital tool of resistance. And the image that you see here is an image by Ntate Heri Moyaga, who borrows, if you've read Indaba My Children by Ubabu Credo, these are some of the symbols that he uses with disc there at the corner, symbolizing the sun, and the future, and this figure here symbolizing a woman who is giving birth. So this is kind of like, presenting a rebirth of 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 a new way of thinking, of a new way of seeing, of a new wave of consciousness. Um, and now when we think about this idea of bringing forth a new way of consciousness, we see that, in fact, during the 60s and 70s, there was sort of like a general um, Black arts movement that that had that was global in many ways, because we know about artists that left from the South, especially post the 76 uprising, as exiles into the US and into the rest of the continent, which gave us some insights. Some of the insights that we find into these journeys are things that you find in Tate Skia Mpahlele's book, Africa, My Music, where he explains his journey and his work in the cultural sphere, working in Tanzania, in Kenya, and in Nigeria, and ultimately in the US. So the Black arts movement sort of found its way as kind of like a seed that was spread across the world and began to sprout in different spaces. Um, and the entire idea behind it was to instill Black pride, or pride in the African who had suffered so much under this global repressive system, and to sort of view the world as a ball of clay, a malleable creative source for imagining human existence, um, as being, as Ntate Steve Kwena Mukwena says, beyond the from Biko's conception of how then the most powerful weapon that is held by the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed itself. Um, and of course, these aesthetics, as I explained, are rooted in cosmic principles that view humanity as a holistic being, as a spiritual being. Um, and then we start to think about how we can communicate these spiritual aspects. And once we have communicated and codified them, how then we bring them into practice as activations, um, as political movements, and as ways of thinking about ourselves beyond slavery, oppression, and genocide. Um, so a part of the global example of um, the Black arts movement and some of its foundations, because in as much as I'm focusing on the 60s, I am aware that there are other movements that came before that led to the pronouncement of the Black arts movement, and borrowing from history to then bring some of these aesthetics to the fore. So we see prints from the Harlem Renaissance that were created by an artist by the name of Elizabeth Cartlett. In the first one, she celebrates Harriet Tubman, and in the third, she celebrates Sojourner Truth. So this idea of reflecting back on ancestry becomes also then a very visual practice. Um, and the middle one is just sort of like a statement of how a lot of the people were working, that all their work was aimed towards organizing the organized. That's the name of the piece in the middle, is that all I do is dedicated to organizing the unorganized, where you see people exchanging leaflets and engaging in these kinds of practices of knowledge sharing, like we're sharing now. So Elizabeth Cartlett is another artist to look at and to study from when we look at the global arts movement, and also as I think as a student of Lefif as well, he stresses this idea of learning from the Afro-American experience, especially in how it propels cultural messages in a specific way. Particularly looking at a period like the Harlem Renaissance and the Black Arts movement that sort of touches on the works of people like Amiri Baraka and Toni Morrison, as I mentioned, amongst others. And out of the Harlem Renaissance came the sculptor Augusta Savage, who sculpted this beautiful harp, which is called "Lift Every Voice and Sing," which is named after a poem that was written by James Weldon Johnson, and then was then adopted by his brother I forgot his name, but his brother then adopted it and wrote it into music, and then the musical hymn was then adopted but by the NAACP as the Negro National Anthem. And it's still sung, I think, to this day at places like cookouts, at churches, and things like that, wherever Black people congregate. And I think it is an important sort of statue to remember and to let endure into memory. Actually, the statue was done in 1934 as part of a New York art fair. And after the fair, I think the sculpture had to be destroyed because there was nowhere to store it. But this in how sort of the
Mbali, I don't know if you can hear him, but I have lost LeratoRato's audio.
Yes, I think he's having network clashes. I'm trying to reach him on the phone just to check in. Please give me few minutes.
Mbali, maybe you could ask him to switch off his video so that the bandwidth can be saved. And if you can, maybe project his presentation for him. Is this something you are able to do so that we follow? Thanks.
I've rejoined now. Yeah, I don't know what happened there, but yeah. Okay, hello. I don't know what happened there with my network.
Hi, we think Dumelam Africa. I think you got cut and we lost you
Yeah.
at the point where you were telling us about the challenges around the sculpture,
Okay,
how it
okay.
was destroyed. But please, let's see if Mbali can project your presentation for you so that your bandwidth is not stretched, and it's okay for you not to
Yeah,
share the video. I think that will assist with
yeah, I
with
think,
the
yeah,
network.
I think my video was still on, so I just switched the
Okay.
video off.
Okay.
So I think that should be okay. So are you guys still able to see the presentation, or do I need
No,
to
the
reach
presentation
it?
is not visible at the
Okay,
moment.
okay, let me reshare it quickly. Okay, cool. Here we go. Are you able to see it now, no?
Yes, it's beautiful. I think we can proceed. Mbali, are you still with us?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah, so I think then what I wanted to move on to is how then in the 20th century, or during the time of the Black consciousness movement here in the South, we began to see demonstrations of how the Black arts movement started to have an effect on the.
I don't know. Mafrika Lerato, please pardon me.
Yeah,
I apologize.
sure.
Is this the slide after the hub, the lift
Yeah,
up? Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
this
Great.
is the slide after the hub.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is me moving
Okay.
from the global perspective of the Black arts movement, and having reflected on the Harlem Renaissance, and then seeing how then some of these manifestations made themselves visible here in the South, and how artists began to cross-pollinate these artistic influences across disciplines, meaning from poetry to the visual arts, and through into music. And I mean, when we think about someone like Heri Moyaha specifically, he was both a musician and an artist, and a visual artist. Someone like Ntate Lefif Tladi straddles almost all those three disciplines. But I think when we look at the post, what I think of as the post Sharpeville era, we see the 1964 Jazz Festival that was which was sort of like a battle of the bands, or a competition that was won by the Malombo Jazzmen, or the Malombo Jazz Makers, that were formed by Ntate Philip Tabane, Ntate Ebi Kindi, and Julian Bahula, as the main proponents of the Malombo style of making music, which was a different take on jazz, that was founded more in Malopo or Malombo, as a spiritual praxis, um, that was looking at bringing spiritual aesthetics, Black spiritual aesthetics into music. And I think this era then led to other sorts of notable progressions, where we saw the rise of different kinds of bands, people moving from names like the Jazz Ministers or the Jazz Epistles and things like that, to names like Batsumi, names like Bazuga, so more Afrocentric names. We saw bands like Sakile, Barungwa, the Malo Poets, and things like that, and they were adopting this kind of African aesthetic, as you could then begin to see it in the musical covers, as opposed to having an image of the musicians being suited up, um, and posing for black and white images or anything like that, then you began to get these colorful kind of images that were a lot more expressive and visually enticing and engaging, but also very abstract, expressionist, and very imaginative in how they thought about the condition of Black life beyond the confines of the township. And in this particular piece that we see here, another one by Hirimuyaga, called Mudimugadi. That the Hirimuyaga then sort of reveres this idea of a spiritual Mopedi deity, who actually to me sounds very much like someone who protects living beings, provides food and rainfall, who sounds very much like Unom Kubulwane. And as I'm saying, that we are seeing a continuation of this kind of thinking around creative work, with the most recent work by pianist and musician and Duduzo Makatini, who just released an album under the name Unom Kubulwane. And in some of his writings and utterances, he speaks about how he makes a particular point actually about how he's trying to communicate the presence of Nom Kubulwane and the entity of Nom Kubulwane as a deity that exemplifies abundance. This is now removing us from these shackles of poverty stricken images in terms of how we think about ourselves, and how we view ourselves, and how we create images that reflect us. But then you continue to see in images like this one of Ntate Moyaga, of like these otherworldly images that speak mostly to spirit and dream. And he does say in the interviews that he gave that he would never pick up a pencil or a paintbrush and enter this spiritual realm in order for him to then transmit these kinds of aesthetics that we see here. And continuing forward, then I'd like to mention a few other artists that I have also encountered, who have also been my teachers, like Mambongi Dlomo, who actually paints and prints similar, I think, to the work of Elizabeth Cartlett. But then she started doing her work more in the 80s and 90s, and then begins to form this bridge from the 70s. And as someone who, unlike Bontate Moyaga and Lefif Tladi, who had to leave the country, she's someone who had stayed here and continued to work as an art administrator. And when you look at her work, you see that she was an organizer at heart, and she was always thinking about organization. In one of the prints where she commemorates the 1954 March of Women to the Union buildings. And in this one, then it's a work that she did later in the 80s, where she was advocating for women activism within the various communities that she worked with, because we know her as an administrator that worked. I think she worked at Funda. She worked with FUBA, the Arts Education Initiative, and she still lives and works in the arts, and is active in community organization in Alexander, where she lives. But I mean, because she has now national reach. Her work can be seen nationally. And then connected to her also, also sort of borrowing on these kinds of spiritual elements that we see in the works of Helen CBD. In the first work, The Dispossessed, I think it's a work that speaks on the issue of land, as we continue to grapple with in the country that we live in South Africa, or in Azania. And what you see in the imagery is more a hopeful image of people working the land, tilling the land. We see children being fed, and you see these positive images of lush green landscapes and colorful people, who and a community of people who are engaged in liberating making work in. And in the second one, she touches on spirituality more directly, where she depicts the king that is praising a spirit bird. We as we know, in African traditions, or in our traditions, we attach ourselves to animals and to totems, and we praise them in various ways. So this could be a visual representation of isithakazelo, uh, a lot more simplified, and this is how then we see visual artists continuing to celebrate cultural and spiritual influences. And then I think then, in my last two slides, I'd like to then go back to another teacher that I mentioned, as I said, in Africa, My Music. He mentions this journey that he takes through the continent, and the different lessons that he learns. And in this particular quote, I think the one thing that I like to pick up is this idea that capitalism and racism tend creative imagination of a people, and this creative imagination only finds hope in the visual arts, or in the arts as a whole, in the cultural sphere. When artists then know what their role is in community, they take up their tools in order to begin to create ways in which we can imagine a life for ourselves outside of the townships that we found ourselves being concentrated in, a way in which we can imagine ourselves as liberated beings, and in a way that we can imagine new ways of being, new ways of, I mean, if we truly think about what the end of colonialism and capitalism are going to be, I think it's always been defined by the Black House Collective as the end of the world as we know it, and the reimagining of this new world shouldn't be such a daunting task. Sometimes people find it to be daunting. I think they find it that way because they haven't been listening to the artists, or they haven't been looking at the artworks, or they haven't been reading the poetry long enough in order to sort of free their imagination from this idea of store-bought foods and things like that, where we can go back to working the land, tilling the land, as suggested by Helen CBD in the previous slide. So this liberation of the human consciousness is what lies at the heart of the decolonial spiritual Black aesthetic. This is what we aim to do when faced with the danger of things like the township aesthetics that comes with the noise that it comes with, that often is classified as music, but often sort of hypnotizes people into thoughtless action. Oftentimes, even tonight, it could happen in any township that people are going to drink, listen to some crazy music, and get drunk, and then fight over whatever menial things that people fight over once the influence has taken over them. And we know, having studied some of the what people call metaphysics or pseudoscience or things like that, that some of these sounds contribute to violent behavior. If you're listening to meditative sounds, you are less likely to be violent. And I think, in fact, the scientific fraternity is moving closer to proving some of these ideas and thoughts that we've been thinking about to be true. And of course, as I sort of write in my last slide, that as a people, we have to see ourselves as a single being that has been fragmented into many, and we seek to be unified. And I think I've always found that sense of unification always when we're singing the same song, dancing to the same song, when we're singing hymns, songs of liberation, and things like that, or when it is that we are viewing certain pieces of work like sculptures and artworks that are awe-inspiring and bring out a certain spiritual spark within us that makes us want to move towards better. And that is what Black consciousness in the arts had aimed to do and continues to seek to do through artists that I know and I worked with, and through the artworks that I myself am trying to create, or any other programs that I participate in, is that we're trying to then create this liberated mind frame where we can deal with things like Afrofutures, and positive worldviews, where we can see ourselves as liberated beings. So yeah, Sis Mbali, I think that is the end of my presentation.
Wow, thank you so much, Africa Lerato. Colleagues, Ms. Khame is having network challenges, but she's quickly making a plan for us. But can you please, yes, I like the responses, I like the reactions. Can you please give a round of applause to Africa Lerato Kuzwayo for such an engaging presentation that's so penetrating, so spiritually uplifting, and visually present. Yes, yes, yes. Please, let's keep reacting. Before, I think we're just gonna buy some time before we welcome our second guest. I'd like Ms. Khame to be the one who does that. But in the meantime, perhaps while we wait for Ms. Khame to settle, I see some people are still joining the conversation. While we wait for Ms. Khame to settle herself so that she can join us back in the conversation, I'm going to open a few hands for reflections, right? Maybe there's a burning question that you want to put to Africa Lerato, a comment.